Welcome to All Things Social Security. Enjoy your video. Happy Friday again. Friday Fraud Law Review, and more importantly, Red Friday in honor of our deployed veterans who cannot be home with their families like most of us can. As you know, this every Friday I do this for those that are interested in it. You have to kind of be into hearing about Social Security related fraud because that's what it's largely about. But here we go. Again, this is catching up on the unreported arrest and or convictions or sentences that the Social Security Administration OIG reports to us. It's publicly available to everybody through the SSA. Well, it's actually oig.ssa.gov, and it's under the press releases. And they were smartly not doing this little fringe benefit during the shutdown. I appreciate that very much because I think that would have been unnecessary at a time of shutdown. But now they're back up, and all the prosecutions that still went on, of course, are now reported on. So to the extent they report them, I don't know what percentage of them get reported. I don't know if it's all, some, none. I really don't know. Anywho, let's get to it. This one is, it's funny because I used to say which district, but now it doesn't. All right, so this one is out of, however, New York State. In particular, it's the Buffalo area. The title is, and I'd like to say the title sometimes because I think it's funny what they decide to name it. It's almost like they get a little politically correct and don't say some of the more critical parts of the case. In this case, it's Buffalo man pleads guilty to defrauding, say, out of out of tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, and this one's just dated October 15th. I'm not necessarily going in the same order. I kind of skim through and pick this time just because we have like 14 that are belated. So what do we have here? So this person pled guilty. So I will say his name. This is John Vincent Ridgway, age 75, of Buffalo, New York. So John Vincent Ridgway, what did you do? He did plead guilty, so I have no problem saying his name because, if he had not pled guilty yet and this was still outstanding, I strongly support his right to being innocent until proven guilty, and I probably wouldn't put his name out there. I never do. Because you never know. He could be innocent. He pled guilty to failure to disclose an event impacting eligibility for SSI benefits. And this carries a maximum penalty, not a minimum, folks, a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $250,000 charge. All right. So it sounds like we'll read on. Sounds like he defrauded SSI. Let's see. In January 1974, Ridgway, let's say the name again, John Vincent Ridgway, began receiving SSI. As you know, that's the federal welfare benefit. It's not the Social Security benefits that are insurance that you pay for whenever you work. Let's see. Based upon his representation that he was disabled and does not own countable resources exceeding $2,000 in value. So just a little digression here, guys. As those of you that are familiar with SSI know, for a single person, you're not eligible for the welfare if you have savings, they call it countable resources, that are greater than $2,000. And what's interesting, and I bemoan this all the time, so I'm just pointing it out here. It was $2,000 back in January 1974. That was considered, well, if you have more than 2,000, you kind of got too much money that the taxpayer shouldn't be paying you the welfare. Okay, I totally get having a resource limit. However, $2,000 in 1974, why has that not been increasing? If that was considered enough to make you decently well-to-do, clearly, what would be now? They don't apply COLA to these resource limits, which I think is a wrong of great magnitude. Huge magnitude. Whether it should be $6,000 now, I don't even know what the COLA would be from 1974 to now, if 2000 was in 1974. All I can tell you is I know it would be a lot higher. It would make a lot of people's life easier on SSI, and that is not the end-all criteria, of course. My point is more like if $2,000 was considered, if you're under that, you really need your SSI. Well, inflation has happened. That number should have moved up. So if you're under 6,000. If you have 5,500 in there, whatever the number would be, it could be less, then you should still be considered poor enough for it that you warrant the SSI. All right, back to the non-digression. Let's go forward. In January of 2004, so what is that? 30 years later, Mr. John Ridgway purchased property in Langmeyer Avenue in Buffalo, jointly with his wife. The value, oh my gosh, the value of the property at the time exceeded 2,000. You bet, you think? Which made him ineligible to continue collecting SSI payments. Ridgway owned the property until March of 2017. This fragmentation of information is why this can go on so long. It's so fragmented, in my opinion. So now keep in mind, and this is another digression, SSI, you're able to own a home so long as you live in it. It's an uncounted resource. It does not go to the 2,000. But it sounds like he may have bought property that he didn't live in. Let's see if it says anything. These reports are really sketchy. They don't say a lot, but sometimes you can get a little nugget out of it. So he bought in 2004, owned it for 13 years. Okay. Also later that year in 2004, SSI Income purchased another property on LaSalle Avenue in Buffalo. The identity of an individual identified as JJR. The value of the property so this is getting a little intriguish. The value of the property at this time of purchase exceeded 2,000, which again made him ineligible to continue collecting SSI payments. Ridgway owned the property until September 2011. JJR, not JVR, since that would be his other initials. So what does it say? He bought a property. The first thing they say is in January, he bought a property on Langmeyer. Ridgway purchased a property. They word this differently for 10 months later. SSI Income, this is how they word it. SSI Income purchased property on LaSalle Avenue in Buffalo. The identity of an individual, I don't think the sentence is property. The identity of an individual identifies JJR, and the value exceeded whatever. But they're saying that Ridgway owned the property until September 2011. All right, so somehow they made the connection. I don't know why they don't just say that. A few months later, in February of 2005, he purchased 2 properties on Northumberland Avenue in Buffalo, the value of which exceeded a mere $2,000. He owned the properties until October of 2022, middle of COVID, once again making him ineligible to continue collecting SSI payments on May. And I assume that is, again, because you can have one property that you live in, and it's not counted. You can't have investment property sitting over there, whether they're making you money or not, because that is an asset that you could sell that isn't where you're living to keep a roof over your head, so you could support your own butt and not take the SSI from the taxpayers and thin it out for all of the appropriately benefited SSI recipients who need it and deserve it and follow the rules. Okay, I go on. In May 2010, Mr. John Ridgway, while collecting SSI, of course, purchased a property on Marigold Street in Buffalo. It sounds like he was able to buy almost all of Buffalo. I don't know, what do you think? I had cousins in Buffalo. I think they're still there. Using the identity of his deceased mother. Okay, so he realizes he's pulling a fast one, obviously. Once again, the value of the property exceeded 2,000. He owned the property until October of 2023, a mere 2 years ago. John Ridgway failed to disclose ownership of any of these properties to the SSA with the intent to continue fraudulently collecting SSI payments. Really, was the $967 a month worth it? I don't understand people's greed. In June of 2021, Mr. John Ridgway completed an SSI redetermination, as they tend to do. On the redetermination form, he stated that he did not own any property and signed it under the following statement, quote, I understand that anyone who knowingly lies or misrepresents the truth or arranges for someone to knowingly lie or misrepresent the truth is committing a crime which can be punished under the federal law, state law, or both. Everything on this document is the truth as best I know it. And of course, that's unquote. The SSA then determined that Ridgway's concealment of his resources resulted in an SSI overpayment of $179,000 between February of 2004 and October of 2023. Now, what's interesting is that's a long time, and it's less than $200,000 because SSI is pretty low. If you were listening last week, if these go in the right order, we talked about a fellow who stole his uncle's Social Security disability of almost $250,000 over a decade, and then also continued to collect it after his uncle died because, it's not true that they don't pay out on dead people. It's just not true, at least not previous to 2025. That particular case, well, it shows the difference between SSI and Social Security. This is a longer period of time, and it's less than $180,000 because it's SSI, which is limited to that whatever amount it is. And in 2025, it's 967. And Social Security insurance, it's an insurance, whether it's retirement or SSD, can be far greater than that because it is what you work and put into it. And that's why that veteran who had worked and put in far more had a far greater benefit than 967 a month. And he collected probably, it looks like at least 50% more. Yeah. In far less years because he had earned and paid for a Social Security benefit and wasn't collecting SSI welfare. All right. This was investigated by the Social Security Administration. The guy did plead guilty. What I was going to add about always, basically stole 179,000 and change from the SSI, the taxpayers. What else was he getting? There's a lot of other local welfare benefits that people take from their towns or their counties or their states because they pass the SSI muster. And that's like an automatic in because they rely on the federal government doing the disability finding and the poorness finding so that the state doesn't necessarily have to pay to recreate the wheel and determine it also for that particular individual who gets the SSI. It's almost like a one way of proving it. So my guess is he probably got SNAP benefits. He might have gotten utility help, getting his electric bill paid, his heating bill. It could be a plethora of benefits that he got. So I digress again, but I just thought that was an interesting point. When they say 179,000 SSI, I think the other benefits can often trounce that and dwarf that amount of 179. He probably was pulling in, I don't know, in welfare benefits. I'd be speculating, but it could be $500,000, $1 million when you add up the value of the other things he got. Just saying. All right. Fraud is no good, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Fraud Law Review. And thank you again to our deployed military members who can't be home to babble about things like this like most of us can. All right. I'll talk to you later. Have a great weekend, guys. Bye-bye.